2, 1, 0, and liftoff, the final liftoff of Atlantis on the shoulders of the Space Shuttle. America will continue the dream.
Good evening. For this program, we're going to concentrate upon the Space Shuttle. Now, that program has now come to an end. It was a success, not an unqualified success, there were one or two hiccups, but nevertheless it's achieved great things. It's shown the way for what can follow. And I'm delighted to be joined by Piers, who's been to the shuttle 3 times, and by Ojha of the National Space Centre, and of course by Chris Lintott. Piers, may I come to you first? You've been to the shuttle 3 times. What are your main memories of it? I mean, there must be many. What's your main memories?
Well, there's a lot to remember, Patrick. You think about it, this program went on for 30 years, 135 missions. An awful lot got done. I was there really for the last half or third of it, which was the construction of Space Station. But, you know, a lot of work was involved with space science, with shuttle before Space Station, and of course the Hubble mission and the Chandra launch and all sorts of other things.
Are you sorry it's now come to an end?
I'm very glad, actually, that it's come to an end safely.
Yes.
Because after the Columbia accident
Yes.
in 2003, there was a lot of discussion about whether we should fly with shuttle at all, you know, after that.
Oh, I know.
And the decision, I think, came down correctly, which was to fly out all the missions necessary to finish off the space station. And we got another Hubble repair mission out of it too.
Yep.
And all that was accomplished safely, and all 3 surviving shuttles are back on the ground and everyone's home safe.
Of course, the idea goes back a long way.
Absolutely, Patrick. If we think back to the golden days of Project Apollo, the problem that we tend to overlook is that if you want to get a space capsule not much bigger than your study, Patrick, back to the Earth with 3 human beings, you needed a rocket that was the height of a 36-floor building. And all of those stages fell into the sea. You couldn't reuse them. If you could develop a spacecraft that could get you orbiting the Earth, but you could reuse as much of it as possible, not only could you reduce the costs, but you could have that spacecraft flying again and again. And the original plans for the Space Shuttle program were to try and have 50 missions a year.
And that just didn't happen.
It didn't, Patrick. I mean, wildly optimistic. And some of that was down to politics. Some of that was down to the final design they had. If you look at books from the 1970s,
Exactly.
so many different designs. US Air Force came on board with their requirements. And what you finally had was an engineering challenge that really pushed the science capabilities and the engineering to its very limits, and in some ways limited the program, I think, Piers.
Yeah, it was hard to, you know, meet everybody's expectations. The Department of Defense wanted a big shuttle, a huge payload bay to carry large reconnaissance satellites, among other things. NASA wanted something that would be able to lug equipment up into orbit and so on and so forth. So the resulting design was rather fragile in engineering terms. It had some weak spots, as we found out with 2 accidents. But not only that, it was operationally fussy to work. It took a lot of care and feeding to get one of these things out to the pad, all 3 million parts working at once, and launch safely.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe
Of course, I go back to the days of the Von Braun Space Wheel and the founding of the British Interplanetary Society, which I was the founder member. That's a long time ago now.
Yeah, well, that was the era of blue skies thinking, of anything we could think of to do the difficult bit of space, which is actually the first few seconds of a launch. That's where you put most of the energy into that initial acceleration. I think one thing people forget about shuttle, and Piers, you could talk more about this maybe, is how complicated a machine it was. Apollo was a great success, but it was relatively simple enough that the astronauts could do their calculations and literally decide that flap needs to move or that engine. And that's not what flying on shuttle was like, right?
Not at all. Basically, this machine could fly itself. It didn't need as large a ground team to do all the work, if you like, then fax up the calculations, and then Apollo would go and do what it was told. That was the way that worked. Shuttle basically carried all its computers with it, and it took itself off, did its mission, and brought itself back.
What does a shuttle mission feel like? What does it look like? And where are the scary bits? You're not a shuttle astronaut anymore, so you can tell us the real story.
And I was never scared, Chris.
Oh, of course not. Of course not, because you have the right stuff.
No fear, not even a little bit.
Okay.
So, yeah. There you go. But you experience all your fear, and you do experience fear, in simulation. And the training is really good. The first few sort of emergency events that you undergo in the simulator, your mind just completely, they call it a helmet fire, your mind just goes completely blank. I have no idea what to do. How do I get out of this? And that's, I think everyone experiences that in the simulator. But by the time you've moshed through that 30, 50 times and you're ready to get into this, it's a very familiar environment. And when things do go wrong, you don't feel frightened. But in any case, on the day, there's this big gantry here, and with your 6 best friends, you take the elevator up. You use the last bathroom on Earth, which is about here. There's a little prison toilet over here. Which
I'm sorry we don't have a model of that.
No, it's about right there. And then come across the gangplank, get in, and you all strap in. There's sort of 4 guys upstairs looking out these windows here, and 2 looking out these windows, and 2 can crane your necks and look out these top windows. And then everyone else downstairs, where you have no windows. It's a very strange place to be.
You took this wonderful ride without a view? Were you downstairs?
I've taken the ride up twice without a window seat. And it's a very strange, experience. That's
so you
right.
just had a wall of lockers.
There's a wall of lockers in front of your nose and your friend right next to you, and then, when the appointed time comes, everything starts shaking and, bouncing off the lockers. And you're just being thrown around.
In a very, very mild way, I know what you mean. Because in my first couple of trips in a bomber aircraft, I hadn't got a window.
There you go. So you're a navigator in the bowels of some
Exactly.
Wellington or something.
Yeah.
You've just got to be brave. Sit there and be brave, right? So, but my first flight up there, I was sitting under this window, and I had a mirror, so I could point it up like that. And I actually watched, in my rear view mirror, I watched Florida just getting smaller and smaller behind me and tip over the horizon. I could see the plume going all the way back down to Florida and a shadow across the ocean of the plume, and then just hammering up into orbit. So it is exciting. Particularly launches are very, very exciting. They're not like anything else you really experience.
And then you're in space.
And then after 8.5 minutes and 10 years of training, you're finally in space. There's this big blue planet, this black sky, and you're sailing along faster you can imagine.
So what are the big achievements for Shuttle?
It made access to space semi-routine with very large payloads. It gave us a space station. We assembled a large structure in orbit, which is something we're going to have to do if we're going to go into deep space, I think. Mm-hmm. Fix some space telescopes.
Thank you.
That's right.
Launch several others, and of course several planetary probes as well.
That's right. Did a lot of science and taught us an awful lot about how to operate in orbit, how to plan something and do the engineering in space.
Hey, Piers? Yeah. Take a second and look. I think you got Ireland and England coming up there. Wow. Oh, my goodness.
And what's your forecast for the next 30 years?
I worry that I will not see humans on Mars in my lifetime, but I'm still optimistic, and I may see human beings visiting an asteroid. And I think that is the real excitement and challenge for me, that we are going to see a return to human exploration of deep space.
What about you?
Oh, I think we're going to go to Mars. Anu just has to concentrate on clean living so he lives long enough to see it. But in the last few years, we're finding out more and more about Mars.
We are indeed, I realise that.
Now we have these streams of brine water.
It's getting there.
Flowing. So there's plenty out there.
If we get to Mars, it's all right.
Yes, you have to get there. But now I think there's more and more reason to go.
I agree.
Which is that, Mars, 2 billion years ago, it was wet, it was warm, had an ocean. So who knows what might have evolved back then.
Quite.
And I think the only way we're going to find out is send, one of our kids at this rate to go and dig it up.
Well, you will find out more than I will, because after all, I am 88, so I haven't got much time left.
You're in your prime, man.
But you have. What's your forecast?
30 years, American spaceflight or human spaceflight? Because I think there's a difference. Which do you want to know about?
You mean you don't regard the Americans as human?
Well,
I'm not sure that I do.
No.
I'm leaving.
Yes, you're pretending to be British, Piers. We know that. No, but I mean, I think if you look at the American space program, I'm afraid I'm fairly pessimistic about the next 30 years. I do believe that.
I hope you're wrong.
I do. Yeah, I hope I'm wrong too. I think the private space flight will take care of the station, but I just don't see any political will in the States to spend money on this. Elsewhere, though, you've got the Chinese, who are in some ways back in the old space race.
Indians.
That's true. And both of those countries are in the space race mentality. It's about national prestige.
Yep.
And we know, because we've seen it happen in the 60s, that can drive at least a program to touch the lunar surface. So I think within your 30 years, we will have had a Chinese equivalent to the Apollo program. Whether they do more with it afterwards than the Americans did, or whether they go a different route, it's
We've
not
got to
clear.
wait and see. Well, Piers and you, thank you very much. It's been a great program, one that's never going to be forgotten, certainly not by you since you've actually been there.
Thank you.
Having fired the imagination of a generation, a ship like no other, its place in history secured, the Space Shuttle pulls into port for the last time, its voyage at an end.
So now, where next? I'm going to ask now Chris Lintott to take up the story.
Mars, the next frontier for man, seems such an obvious step in space exploration. So why aren't we on our way? After all, we're always talking about it as if it's only around the corner. In the early half of the last century, we had such bold ideas about spaceflight. These drawings by R.A. Smith assumed that we'd be on Mars by the end of the 20th century at the absolute latest. These wonderful old science fiction books of Patrick's, mostly written in the 1950s, are a reminder that space travel hasn't always been about arguing about money and politics, but that it used to be a place for visionaries who could think up spacecraft, the likes of which we can only dream of today. Those dreams soon started to become a reality. This programme, from 1957, is about spaceflight, featuring a prototype RAF spacesuit. Here is a very familiar young man talking about his dreams of interplanetary travel.
Well, nobody in the British Interplanetary Society underestimates the difficulties, but they have made very considerable contributions to what has been going on, and in particular, a good deal of the early theoretical work on Earth's satellite was carried out by its members.
The space race accelerated our ambitions for space travel, and the success of Apollo fueled expectations that Mars must be the next stop. But it was not to be. The commitment to the Space Shuttle and then to the space station proved to be nothing more than a space cul-de-sac.
You know, it looks much better.
The last manned mission to the moon was Apollo 17 in 1972. Its commander, Captain Eugene Cernan, has a very personal stake in America's space program.
Houston, this has got to be one of the most proud moments of my life, I guarantee you. Roger 17, and we thank you very much.
His final boot prints on the lunar surface, now nearly 40 years old, remain the high watermark for human exploration of the solar system. This is how he felt about it back in 2008.
I'm a little disappointed with what's gone on for the last 30 years. You know, we don't have the capability to go back to the moon today. We're trying to redevelop it all over again. We're living relatively in the comfort and confines of our own home planet, 200, 300 miles away. We've been spending time trying to exploit space. From my point of view, it doesn't go anywhere. You know, when you've been to the moon, not once but twice, staying home, you know, this sounds a little arrogant. Staying home is no longer good enough. We've been there, done that. Let's get on with it.
3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector good.
Astronomer Stuart Clark has been following the space program closely. I chatted to him about why we've become so disappointingly tied to Earth.
In a sense, it's lack of money, and it's also a product of the time at which those early dreams were born. So we were coming out of the Second World War. There was a feeling of optimism, and that now was a new start, and that new start dovetailed with the beginning of the space age, and so those kind of utopian visions.
Anything can happen.
Anything can happen. What in fact happened was a collapse of that optimism into really a kind of a market-driven force. And what can space do for us?
It's not just the lack of money that stopped us surfing the solar system. There are considerable obstacles to overcome if we're ever to go to Mars.
Mars is one of the trickiest places to land in the solar system because the planet is large enough to have quite a strong gravitational field, so you have to have extremely powerful retro rockets to bring you down safely. And the other thing about it is that it's far away, and that increases the risk of radiation from the sun.
And we've only talked about getting there. Getting back is a problem as well, of course. I mean, what would you do? Build your own fuel on the surface?
That's pretty much the way people think now, is that you have to try and manufacture the fuel actually on the surface of Mars itself, because it would just be too big and too heavy to take with you.
We do still have dreamers. Meet Icarus, a visionary design for a robotic mission to the stars, developed by the British Interplanetary Society and their colleagues. It may look like science fiction today, but who knows? In 200 years, this may be science fact. With the end of the shuttle, NASA's relying on hitching a ride on Russian rockets to provide the space station with its supplies and with fresh crew. This month's disaster, when an unmanned Russian rocket exploded, losing its cargo, suggests that problems might lie ahead. But let's take a moment to appreciate what's been achieved, both with the Space Shuttle program and the International Space Station, the results of literally millions of hours of hard work. Overhead, the space station passes at around 28,000 kilometers per hour and completes 16 orbits of the Earth every single day. It's something we can all sit back and marvel at. These images of the station come from our Sky at Night Flickr site, which can be found at bbc.co.uk/skyatnight.
I can get it in my binoculars!
These images of the station, taken by Tom Harradine in Australia, show the last shuttle mission, Atlantis, in July, on its final fly-around of the International Space Station. You can almost imagine them waving goodbye to each other. We're lucky enough to have a pass of the ISS which should be dazzlingly bright. In Patrick's Garden, Pete Lawrence and Paul Abel are waiting for it to rise above the horizon.
Well, here we are, Pete, in Patrick's Garden. Lovely clear night. And our cameraman here, Andy, I hope you've got it inside. You're going to try and film it, aren't you, as it goes past over the house. Now, why don't you tell us, Pete, what path is it going to follow as it goes on?
Well, this one's coming up from the west-southwest, and then it's going to head more or less overhead. It's about 87 degrees up.
This is a good one, then.
So 90 degrees is overhead, so that's virtually overhead, and then it'll head all the way down there into the northwest. And there it is over there.
There it is, yeah, we've got it
coming. So
it's already quite bright, isn't it?
That's about the same brightness, slightly dimmer than Arcturus at the moment, but it will get much, much brighter as it goes overhead. That's
hard to believe, isn't it? There are human beings on that point of light. That is, that's really quite impressive. I'm going to have a look at it through the binoculars.
Can you actually see any detail?
You can tell it's irregular in shape. I can't really tell much more than that.
Isn't that amazing?
Just think of the view they would be having now. I mean, you've got the Earth coming into darkness, and the lights of the big cities would be sadly spilling out. It'd be quite an impressive sight from space, wouldn't it?
That is really impressive.
How would you recommend that people look them up and find out when they're going to happen?
Well, the easiest way to do it is to go onto a website. It's called www.heavens-above.com.
Yeah, I use that one.
And if you go on there, and then you can enter your location details.
Yep.
Okay. And once you've done that, it will give you a customised table for every ISS pass that you can see.
Right.
Now, throughout September, unfortunately, they're actually going to stop in the first part of the month, and they pick up again right at the very end of September. So if you want to see the ISS, if you go out, say, from about the 25th, or check on from about the 25th of September onwards, that's when you'll start to see them again. It's starting to fade now. You can see that noticeably, and there it goes. It's almost gone. And it's gone. It's gone.
No, I can still see it.
Can you still see it?
No, you're right. It has gone. Definitely gone now.
It's gone into the Earth's shadow. So that's the ISS. Now, the ISS is something you can go out and you can see, so long as it's up there, with your naked eye.
Brilliant.
Pete and Paul, thank you very much. Well, when I come back next month, I'll be talking about two very interesting constellations, Pegasus and Andromeda. So until then, good night.
Film comedy next tonight, and 60s sexual liberation for Renee Zellweger and Ewan McGregor in Down with Love.